Hello, I'm Chris Ringland. Welcome to what passes for winter in South Australia. Well, it's actually not nearly as extreme as, say, winter in Comenta, where the altitude's a lot higher. It's more like, I suppose, winter in San Francisco, so not really all that wintry, but we certainly get all excited about it. Having said that, hello Chris and Mary, and hello Inigo, Maria. It would be much preferable to me if I was in San Diego or in Spain, but that's how it goes. I think the contribution to the tasting that I'd like to make is giving you a bit of the background story to Veraton, Bodegas Alto Moncayo. As Inigo pointed out, we started our collaboration. We're back with the 2002 vintage, so we've been going together for quite some time now, and we've become pretty comfortable with how we work and what we're doing. But I travelled quite extensively around different regions of Spain in the winter of 2001, and the prospect of developing some winemaking projects in Spain was pretty exciting for me at that time. Of course, any winemaking project has some fundamentals that form the foundation, and of course it's vineyards. And most of the time that I spent in Spain, of course apart from having lunch and dinner, which was the main focus, was evaluating vineyards, and the time that we spent together, firstly during the winter of 2001, so February, and then again later in the season once the vines had started to show fruit in May, June, and giving plenty of time to sort of prepare for the establishment of a new standalone bodega. Comenta is a pretty unique wine region in Aragon. Of course, it's the home of its native grape, Garnacha, Grenache, and as Inigo explained earlier on, the great thing about Garnacha and Aragon is that the people have a 2,000-year head start on selecting the vines and seeing how the vines adapt to that environment. Garnacha, I need to remind you, is a native of Aragon, and all of the Grenache and Cabernet grown around the west of the world came from here originally. Not here in the Barossa, obviously, that would be weird, but here in Aragon. The sub-regions of Comenta are quite unique for the establishment of Garnacha as a wine. One thing that I observed during our first vineyard evaluations was that we have lower altitude vineyards around Pozuelo on the Ebro River Valley. This is the southern end of the Ebro River Valley. Of course, the higher altitude vineyards around Comenta itself, and then the high altitude vineyards up in the mountain valleys on the flanks of Alto Moncayo around Tabuenca. It was very clear to me early on that we had an incredible array of different vineyards to work with, and ultimately we have around 60 individual vineyard plots that go to form the composition of Bodegas Alto Moncayo. Looking back, the original objective was to produce two wines, and this is what I proposed. A main wine, which was going to be called Alto Moncayo, and a top special vineyard selection, barrel selection, which was to be called Aquilon, and with the 2002 vintage, that is the method that was used to create the different wines. The piece of winemaking that I brought to the table with regards to the project was actually, again, as Inigo is indicated, pretty simple. The winemaking itself, very simple fermentation on skins, very gentle pressing, and then completing the fermentation in new oak and some seasoned oak. maturing the wines for around 24 months before bottling, and then letting them rest a while before being released to market. The second vintage of the project created a significant advance in development, and 2003 was quite an unusual vintage, and it was very important to have an unusual vintage early on in our collaboration. It was quite a cool, late and relatively wet vintage, and it became very clear as we were evaluating the new wines that two distinct stylistic expressions were starting to emerge with the Garnacha. Some of the vineyards were producing more fruit-forward wines, and some were producing more darker berried, substantial classic. Very rapidly recognised that we had an opportunity to create three different expressions for the Bodegas Alto Moncayo project, and Veraton was born. Veraton is the selection that Jose Luis Cuenca and I make from the vineyards that in a given year produce a more fruit-forward, softer structured, more accessible style of Garnacha. And then of course there are other vineyards that produce the more powerful, long-lived wines which form the foundation of Alto Moncayo, and then of course vineyard selections that we agree and make are going to become Aquilon. Very early in the piece, Jose Luis Cuenca took me up to the family bodega in Tabuenca and opened bottles of Garnacha that his father had made during the 1960s. And this of course was very important education for me and gave very important insight into what we were going to do, how we were going to achieve it, and the sort of wines that we were going to make. This is all part of developing a collaborative understanding and of course working together. This table that I'm sitting at here in the Barossa Valley Ranges is the table on which I make the selections for Bodegas Alto Moncayo. And for the past 10 years, Miguel, Jose Luis have drawn barrel samples from all of the individual groups, and at any given tasting there can be as many as 60 individual vineyard components on this table. The samples are collected in duplicate and then flown down to Australia. I let them rest for a few weeks and then taste the wines over several days and formulate a plan which I then transmit to Jose Luis, and then the work starts on actually preparing the blends for bottling. So a couple of months ago at this table I completed my evaluations for the upcoming 2018 vintage. Of course, as you'd be aware, the current vintage of Veraton Alto Moncayo is the 2017. And here, just to have a bit of a show off, I've got a couple of bottles of Veraton. This one, the very first vintage, 2003, and this one from the very great 2005 vintage. It's wonderful for me to have collaborated with the guys so that I have a collection of all of these wines here maturing in my cellar in the Barossa Ranges. And I would venture that a 2003 Veraton is a pretty rare bottle in the Southern Hemisphere. It was a great start for the Veraton project, and I'm proud to say this wine is still maturing beautifully. I still have a case. I don't know when I'm going to open it, open extra bottles, but maybe once travel begins again, we'll find some sort of excuse. At any rate, I'm hoping that gives you some sort of background and insight into how Veraton came to be and how we've been working very happily and profitably and rewardingly for the past nearly 20 years. It's amazing how time flies when you're making wine. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the wine, and I hope you have a good tasting dinner. Thank you. Hopefully I'll catch up with you in person soon.